Happy Taurus season! So today I'm not going to actually put out an interview episode. I decided that for my birthday week, I will be resharing the very first episode I ever put out about my story. So my birthday is on May 15th, so it just passed, but I am currently hanging out in Costa Rica celebrating my birthday, my successes. I've been working really hard this year, so definitely a little treat yourself weekend. So here is the first episode I ever put out on the Employee to Boss podcast months ago. I was so excited and nervous to put this episode out because, I tell podcasters all the time, you need to tell people who you are. You need to share your story. You need to do this, that. And then when it came for me to do it, it was nerve-wracking. And so for anyone thinking to start a podcast, do it. It's scary. You may have those feelings that you're going to be judged by people you don't know, which you will be, but who cares? So in this special episode, I tell the story of how I started Espresso Podcast Production, why I started this podcast, and it's just a little replay. So let's get right into that. Hi, welcome to the Employee to Boss podcast. My name is Hayleigh Hayhurst. I am the owner of Espresso Podcast Production. I am a podcast producer and coach. I help businesses and entrepreneurs increase their visibility by implementing marketing strategies that work, and that includes a podcast. So I have been working in the podcast industry since June of 2020. But before that, I had my own podcast when I was in college. I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada. I lived there up until I was 23 years old, and I went to school at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, majoring in journalism and media studies with a minor in political science. Needless to say, I love talking, I love communicating, I love everything that podcasting encapsulates. And so that is why I'm so excited to be launching my very own podcast. I have helped my clients launch their podcast, grow their podcast, monetize their podcast, and now it's time for me to have some fun. So I wanted to give a little bit of a backstory about me, how I got into this industry, and really why I am having this podcast, Employee to Boss. So like I said, I grew up in Las Vegas. I went to college with one of my friends, and we started a pro wrestling podcast. Yes, I know, sounds crazy, but we talked a lot about women wrestling. We talked about WWE, AEW, all of those big wrestling brands, and really like the drama behind it, the stories behind it, and especially the women. And that's where I really learned everything about podcasting. I was very into WWE, but then I stepped away from that podcast, and my friend still does it. It's called Wrestling Wind Down. You should go and check her out because she is absolutely amazing, knows so much about wrestling, and her vibes are just perfect. Her name is Lo. And so that's really how I got into podcasting. We were editing our own episodes. We were promoting it all by ourselves. And yes, it was a lot of work, but it was fun. I think of podcasting as an outlet to just like express yourself. And one of the big things that I want to stress in this podcast is you don't have to leave your 9 to 5. You don't have to start your own business, but you should be doing something that brings you joy outside of your 9 to 5. So if your whole life is your corporate job, it's going to lead to burnout. You're going to get bored. You're going to get annoyed. You're going to want something more. And so a lot of people love to make money, and that's why side hustles are so popular right now. Honestly, you can make a side hustle out of anything. You could make a side hustle of watching dogs on the weekend. You can make a side hustle of selling ebooks, selling sports cards. Really, anything out there can be a side hustle. It could be labor intensive. There's so many different things that you can do. And my favorite is podcasting. So when I'm working with my clients, what a lot of them do is they're adding a podcast to their business. And one of the main reasons for this is because it's pretty hard to express your personality and everything just through texts, reels, and live videos. Now, live videos are going to be the best way to show off your whole personality because you can see your hands and everything like that. But most people only go live on Instagram or Facebook for like 20, 30 minutes. At least that's what I do on my Instagram, Espresso Podcast Production. And so just keeping that in mind, a podcast can open up so many doors for you to use it as a creative outlet, you to just have fun with it. Podcasting is fun. And so that is what I am all about. So this podcast is going to be for entrepreneurs who are new to their industry, are pivoting in their industry, anyone in the corporate world looking to start a side hustle or completely leave your 9-to-5 and start a new business. I'm talking with experts in all different industries, literally from voice coaches to fitness experts, to social media managers, to confidence coaches, to coaches of all different types. You know, some of my favorite episodes so far are those deep ones where we talk about why you really want more out of life, how to get more out of life, all of that. So a little bit more about me. I live in Seattle, Washington. I moved here about a year and a half ago. After being laid off of my corporate job, I was working for UFC at the time, and I had just graduated college in December of 2019, right before the pandemic. My life was supposed to go in so many different ways. I was accepted into the Peace Corps, where I would have been teaching English in Cambodia. I was supposed to go for 2 years. I was supposed to leave June of 2020. And of course, because of coronavirus, everything got delayed, kept getting more and more delayed. And eventually I just had to accept this is my life. This is what it's meant to be. The universe does not want me to go to Cambodia and teach English to children. And it was a hard shift. So I moved to Seattle because I really had nothing going on in Las Vegas. Even though I grew up there, all of my family is there. I moved here with all of my stuff in a minivan and moved in with one of my best friends. And so since then, I was just figuring out what I wanted to do in life. I was just trying new things, meeting new people, experiencing new things that I've never experienced before, living on my own. And eventually I saw a post on Instagram about my cousin's cousin. Her name is Hayleigh Maslow. She was looking for a podcast editor. And I was thinking to myself, I could use some extra income right now. Like, unemployment's not going to last forever. Why not just try it? So I reached out to her. We had a meeting and she hired me as her podcast editor. I was doing that for probably about a month and a half until she introduced me to my next client. Her name is Atty Greenspun. At the time, Atty just needed a virtual assistant. And so I thought to myself, yeah, sure, why not? Like, it will be fun. But that opened so many doors for me into the virtual assisting world. I was still doing podcast editing. I was bringing on podcast editing clients and virtual assistant clients. At the time, that was great for me. And then I got burnt out. I had never worked on my own business before. I had never worked from home before. And I was in charge of my income. I was in charge of everything about my lifestyle. How hard I worked really led to how much money I made in the very beginning because I was charging hourly rates and I wasn't charging very much. That led me to hire my first mindset coach. Her name is Kira Patrick. Her coaching program is called Firefly Coaching. I will link it down below because Kira absolutely opened up my mind to so many different opportunities. It was hard for me to accept the fact that I was, not going back to corporate. I was working for my own and I was honestly loving it. Like, it was so much fun being able to set my own schedule, set my own hourly rate, all of those things until it all became too much. And that's when I started charging in different ways. And I decided virtual assistance is not for me. I love using my brain. I love being creative. I love not doing repetitive tasks. And so I stepped away from that side of my business and really went all into podcasting. So I realized in the podcast world, there are so many podcasts out there. I know. It sounds like, yeah, of course, Hayleigh, there's so many podcasts out there. But no, listen, there's probably over 1 million podcasts. That doesn't mean there's 1 million active podcasts. That just means that someone started a podcast, uploaded an episode, and didn't know what to do next. Or they have a weekly podcast and they just are not doing anything with it that can promote it. When we put a lot of time and effort into something, of course, we want to make money from it. Of course. I mean, that just makes sense, right? And so what I help podcasters do now is either start their podcast, or I offer free podcast audits available to anyone with a podcast. And I look at your social media, your content that you're putting out there, and also just like how it sounds, the vibes, if it all matches. And from there, I help you create a strategy that will help actually grow your podcast. I cannot tell you how many of these calls I've been on, probably over 100, maybe closer to 200 at this point, where it's just, I am telling them exactly what they need to do and they don't follow through with it because of that accountability factor. You know, there's a ton of amazing podcasts out there, but it's really hard to find them because there's so many podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, they're not very searchable. What I mean by that is when you are going to look for a new podcast, let's say a money podcast, those are some of my favorite, honestly, a money podcast. You are going to see so many money podcasts up there, and it's going to be like the top 10, like the Financial Feminist podcast or Dave Ramsey. And don't get me wrong, Financial Feminist is one of my favorite podcasts out there right now. Her first 100K is absolutely life-changing. You should go follow her. But my point is, you could have a money podcast and it can be just as incredible, but you don't have the same marketing ideas that she has or that same marketing background that she has. And so with that, of course, not as many people are going to see your podcast. You can have great content, but not be showing up in the same way that a top producing, top income podcast is. So that is what I do. That is what I help my clients do. And that is how people work with me. So in this podcast, Employee to Boss, I am going to show you the key steps to having espresso growth in your business. And espresso is one of those keywords for me because it is my business, Espresso Podcast Production. I want you to have fast results that actually work. And of course, overnight fixes are not going to be sustainable. Overnight success is just not realistic. So in this podcast, I'm speaking with top industry experts in so many different fields about how they got to where they are, because it's been a journey for all of us. And with that, I am going to be having them share 3 actionable steps that you can take to start getting your business where they are. Now, with that, comparison is not the way that we're going to look at our businesses. You cannot compare your day one to someone's year one. Okay, there's so many different aspects and so many different things that we have to work through. And I just want you to be conscious of that when listening. Do not get down on yourself for not being where they are. Do not get down on yourself for not being as successful as you may have thought. You know, there's a whole judgment thing that comes around starting your own business and side hustle. And that's what the first episode is really about with females who side hustle. We talk about how side hustling can be such a dirty word and how we want to hide it. But really, there's no point in that. So that is about this podcast, about me. I told you a little bit about my background, but about me right now, I am absolutely loving my life, doing what I love to do. Being in the podcast industry, coaching. I'm having courses come out very, very soon about podcast marketing, how to launch your podcast, how to start your podcast. And so many exciting things are happening. Like I said, I live in Seattle, Washington, and it's such a beautiful place that I never expected to have this many opportunities in. Like I said, I thought I was just going to be here for just a couple months and then go to Cambodia, but that's not the case. I am a dog mom, I am a Taurus, and I just absolutely love everything about what the city has, what my business is showing me, and all the things I'm learning about myself. I would love to connect with each and every one of you. My Instagram is Espresso Podcast Production, ESPRESSO, Podcast Production. I have a very active Facebook group full of podcasters, podcast guests, and people wanting to be either podcast guest or start their own podcast. That is on Facebook, called Espresso Growth, for podcasters, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders. It's free, and I have weekly trainings in there. And on Instagram, I share tons and tons of content about podcasting, podcast tips. And I also go live there once a week with different experts to talk about podcasting and how it intertwines into so many businesses. So I would love it if you could subscribe and leave me a review. And if you don't know me yet, I hope that you will, because I love connecting with each and every one of you. When you leave a review, you can leave a review about this podcast, or you can share about your side hustle, what you want your side hustle to be, whatever it may be. I'm going to read every single one of those and hopefully reach out to you in like a year, 6 months, however long it takes for you to start. I want to hear your success just by listening to other people sharing their successes, because if they can do it, so can you. It's not hard. It's just, you have to dedicate yourself to it. I am so excited to be launching this podcast. I help my clients all the time do this, and it's time for me to have some fun with it as well. The best way to reach me is on Instagram. You can also send me an email at hello@Espresso Podcast Production if you're not on social media, and let's just get talking. If you have a podcast or you want to start a podcast, I would love to offer you one of my free podcast audits. We go over marketing, content, every single aspect, and I look at it and give you my honest audit. It's very, very honest, but I mean it in all the best ways, because I want you to grow and I want you to be successful. So with that, it will be in the show notes, and just book a time with me. I'm not scary. I am not salesy. I honestly want all of us to succeed. And so I'm so excited for this podcast to launch. Again, my name is Hayleigh Hayhurst. I am the owner of Espresso Podcast Production. You can follow me on Espresso Podcast Production on Instagram, or find me on Facebook, Hayleigh Hayhurst, and my Facebook group, Espresso Growth, for podcasters, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders. I will be putting out an episode every single Tuesday, and I'm so excited for you to listen.